Hello everybody, welcome to part 7 of my positional ranking series, going division by division, ranking every single roster as far as how they stack up against their division opponents. Today we have the AFC West, definitely a very top-heavy division with the Chiefs at the top, but I think there's a lot of very interesting teams as well in this division. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the rosters of all 4 teams in the AFC West. We're going to start with the quarterback position, and of course the Chiefs are number 1 here. Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the NFL, so not really a lot to talk about there. He's dominant. Another, just great season with him coming off a Super Bowl, back-to-back champions. He is just clearly the best quarterback in the NFL. His ability to create plays outside of structure, he's just very, very dominant. And so you absolutely know what you're going to be getting with him. It's stellar quarterback play. There's enough said about Patrick Mahomes there. Then at 2, we're going to go with Justin Herbert and the Chargers. Obviously, he needs to find some postseason success. There's no doubt about it, but I think the talent is still absolutely undeniable. I think that the offense really has not been well suited around his game. He has great arm strength. I think he is really good, inside the pocket, stepping up and throwing balls downfield. I think he can do a really good job going through progressions, but really his arm strength, his arm talent, his playmaking ability, that's really where he thrives, and I think the Chargers haven't done a very good job of letting him do that. I am curious to see what he's able to do in a Jim Harbaugh offense, which also may focus a lot on running the ball and kind of ground and pound style. So I'll be curious to see if Justin Herbert is really able to elevate his game within this new coaching staff. But I think based on pure talent and kind of what he's shown, he's very clearly number 2 in this division. Then we have the Raiders at number 3. I actually really like Gardner Minshew. Do I think he's an amazing quarterback? No, definitely not. But I think every stop he's been a top 32 quarterback in the NFL. And I think he's led a lot of teams better than they expected to be with Gardner Minshew at the helm. And I think it is a testament to how well Gardner Minshew has played. I don't think he's a complete liability by any means in that regard. You also have Aiden O'Connell. Definitely they're going to see what they have in him. I'm sure he'll play a decent bit this year. But I think right now Gardner Minshew should be the starter, and I expect him to be as well. I think that he's at least deserved that opportunity, and then Aiden O'Connell will come in probably at some points. Though, he had some flashes last year. I'm not sure that either one of these guys are their franchise quarterback by any means, but I do think that they can at least be solid stopgap options for this year. Then we have the Broncos up at number 4 with Bo Nix. I do think Bo Nix could turn into a pretty decent quarterback, and I think that in Sean Payton's offense, where he is going to be very predetermined, and this is where I'm going to be looking with the football, kind of first read. If it's there, I can operate really well within the structure of an offense. I think that's great for Bo Nix, and that's exactly what Sean Payton wants as well in his quarterback. So I think the pairing is a really good pairing. I think it makes a lot of sense. I didn't have a first-round grade on Bo Nix, and so, taking him in the top 12 was early for me, but I do understand why they had to do it. You couldn't go into next year with Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham as your starting quarterback, so it will be interesting to see how Bo Nix does. I think he could have a pretty good rookie season. I just don't see that high-end talent that would really elevate him into a true star quarterback in the NFL. I think he could be a perfectly adequate starter. We just haven't seen it yet. And, with him being a rookie, I do think that we are going to put them at number 4. But I could see Bo Nix certainly surpassing the Raiders in that number 3 spot. Moving to the running back spot up next, I am going to also have the Chiefs at number 1. Isaiah Pacheco has been incredibly productive. 7th round pick. He's well outplayed that ranking. And, he's been a really good, powerful runner. Everybody makes fun of his running style, but he truly he runs so hard, and he is tough to bring down. You also still have Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You have Deneric Prince, a couple other guys in that room. But Pacheco's really turned into their true 3-down back. He's done it kind of 2 years in a row where he's been their big bell cow back. And I do think that they do run the ball a lot more than people understand as well. He has been very productive when he's gotten touches, and I think he is clearly the number 1 running back in this division. Next, we're going to go to the Denver Broncos. I think there's a lot of uncertainty in this division when it comes to running backs. Javonte Williams is definitely the big question mark. Can he get back to kind of his pre-injury numbers? It's really taken a dip in his yards after contact, his missed tackles force percentage, which was such a huge part of his game. He's definitely not the same player that he was pre-injury, so a couple of years now removed from that, maybe he's able to be a little bit more productive, and we're able to see that kind of player but I don't think you can necessarily count on that. I do like the depth in this Denver running back room. You have Samaje Perine, who's a good pass blocker. He's solid out of the backfield. He'll get what's in front of you in the running game, but he's not a true explosive back. Audric Estime, I really liked that pick in the 5th round. I thought he was good value. Out of Notre Dame, big bruising back. He did not run fast in his 40, but I thought he showed more athleticism on tape. And then Jaleel McLaughlin, who was an undrafted free agent last year. He showed some really nice things in the receiving game as well. He pretty well outperformed Javonte Williams for the most part on a per touch basis. So I think you're 4 deep. Even Blake Watson, who you got this year as an undrafted free agent, I thought he showed some really nice things at Memphis this year. So I really like the depth of this Broncos running back room, even though it may lack a true star if Javonte Williams is not able to get back to his pre-injury form. Then we're going to go with the Chargers up next. They move on from Austin Eckler, who really, truly did look kind of cooked at the end of last season. Don't blame at all moving on from him, but I think you've got some interesting pieces. J.K. Dobbins also has had major injury concerns. Obviously, he's a much younger version, but the big thing with him is, can he stay healthy? I thought, in Baltimore, he looked good at times when he was able to actually be out there, especially, his rookie season. He looked really, really good, but the injury bug has just killed him. Gus Edwards also, has been another player that has taken advantage of some of the opportunities when J.K. Dobbins has gone down. He's dealt with some injuries himself. Can he be a true bell cow back? I don't know. Kamani Vidal is a really interesting one to keep an eye on. He was a 6th-round pick, and, he's really short, but he is compact. He's like a bowling ball. He reminds me a lot of kind of a poor man's Blake Corum. So, obviously, you can see the vision with what Harbaugh might like in Vidal, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if he ends up being kind of the dominant back here over the next few years. Isaiah Spiller, also a 4th-round pick that you have in this room as well. Then we have the Raiders at number 4. It's mostly just due to the uncertainty of the position. Zamir White is your running back. I really like Zamir White coming out of Georgia. 6 foot, 215 pounds, just 24 years old. I think he definitely has had some moments where he's looked really good. Hit 145 yards against the Chiefs in Week 16, had 112 yards against Denver in Week 18. When he's gotten his opportunities, I think for the most part, he's done pretty well with them. He really only had 4 games where he got significant carries last year, and they were all pretty productive, good games for him. I think that he's good after contact. He's really dangerous with the ball in his hand. I think he could turn into a really good player, but you're just betting on basically a 4-game sample size with him. And, there are some decent running backs in this division. You have Alexander Mattison as well, who was a complete disappointment in Minnesota last year in his first true starting opportunity, but as an RB2, I think he's fine. Amir Abdullah as a change of pace kind of returner as well, I think is interesting. Dylan Lobby, I did really like that pick out of New Hampshire. He's kind of a pure receiving back. I would be interesting to see if he can make a difference at some point on this roster. But I think the Raiders, for now, are number 4, but Zamir White definitely is very intriguing. I think the up arrow would be pointed up on him, and you can make an argument that, they could easily climb this relatively quickly with a productive year from Zamir White. Next up at wide receiver, it is going to be the Raiders. They have the best wide receiver in this division, and I don't think it's particularly close. Davante Adams maybe didn't have his best year, but still had 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns in his first year without Derek Carr in Vegas. I mean, he is still an amazing route runner. Even though he's 31 years old, I still think he's incredibly productive. 6'1", 215 pounds. He's just one of the best pure route runners in the entire league. And, it's not just him. Jacoby Myers had another productive year. You also have Trey Tucker, who I thought showed some decent things out of Cincinnati as a 3rd-round pick in the slot last year. You have Jalen Guyton, Michael Gallup, who you signed over from Dallas, who, when he's been able to stay healthy, has been a very productive player. But I think long and way, they have the best wide receiver in this division. So Davante Adams with the Raiders, that's going to put them at number 1. I don't think it's the strongest wide receiver division. Then at number 2, we are going to put the Chiefs. They have a lot of young talent at this spot. Xavier Worthy, their 1st-round pick, super speedster. I do think he has some drop issues. I'm not sure he's a true complete player, but I do think as kind of that backside deep threat, he's definitely very intriguing. I will be interested to see how they line up because I think they've got a lot of guys who might be best kind of in the slot. They're not always the biggest guys. You've got Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, as long as he's able to stay out of legal trouble, has been really good. For them last year, he was really good. Kadarius Toney, Justin Watson, Sky Moore, Justin Ross, Mecole Hardman. I mean, they've got a lot of guys, a lot of names on this list. I would say that, those first three, Worthy, Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, are the only three that you think might actually be difference makers, but there's still a lot of unprovenness kind of in that regard. So be curious to see kind of how that lays out for the Chiefs, but I do have them at number 2 just because I think they have kind of the most upside of the 3 remaining teams. Then we are going to go with the Broncos up next. This is mostly due to Courtland Sutton, who I do think is kind of a low-end wide receiver 1. I do really like him. You have Josh Reynolds, who up until the NFC Championship game was great for the Lions and then had a complete meltdown. You also have Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, Tim Patrick. I think those guys are all very interesting. Franklin reuniting with Bo Nix. Marvin Mims was a second-round pick out of Oklahoma. I think they fill a very similar role, but I'll be curious to see kind of how that works for them. You've got some young, interesting pieces. Sutton is kind of a true wide receiver 1-ish type of player, so I think putting them at number 3 is fair. And then we have the Chargers at number 4. They move on from Mike Williams and from Keenan Allen this offseason, so it is really pretty bare in the wide receiver room. You do get Ladd McConkey in the draft. I think he's a really good separator. You have Quentin Johnston, who looked terrible as a rookie, but he still has potential. I mean, he had major drop issues. I don't think he was very good at creating separation, coming down with contested catches, but he was a first-round pick for a reason. He has talent. He just has to show it and be much more consistent. You have Josh Palmer, DJ Chark, who had moments in Carolina. He did not get any separation, but he did come down with a few tough catches. Brennan Wright's an interesting prospect out of USC in the 7th round as well. So there are some swings here, but definitely not much when it comes to proven talent in the wide receiver room for the Chargers. So that's going to put them pretty easily at number 4. Moving to the tight end spot, obviously the Chiefs going to be number 1. Travis Kelce is the best tight end in the game until proven otherwise. And, you also have Noah Gray, Jared Wiley, Irv Smith. You've got some interesting depth pieces, but Travis Kelce, obviously, he's up there in age, but until he shows a fall off, he is going to be ranked number 1 in this division. And, I don't think there's any argument at all for otherwise. But I do like the Raiders tight end room quite a bit. They've invested 2 high draft picks in the last 2 drafts into getting these guys. Michael Mayer, who was my tight end 1 last year, and then Brock Bowers, who was my tight end 1 this year. Both of those guys I think are really intriguing. Brock Bowers can kind of play a little bit more of that H-back role in this offense, with Mayer also having that true kind of Y tight end experience. I think these guys could be really dangerous playmakers for whoever their quarterback is, Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell or whoever eventually they do end up drafting, who, I believe will be relatively soon. I think both of these guys could be long-term pieces in the middle of the field and be really, really good difference makers for them. So I really like the young tight end room for the Raiders. Brock Bowers, I do think, was a generational tight end prospect. So getting him outside of the top 10, I do think was a really good move for the Raiders, even if it wasn't the biggest area of need. I do still really, really like it. For the Chargers up next, they have a fine tight end room. It's nothing special, but it is okay. You'll get what you need out of it. You have Will Dissly, Hayden Hurst, Donald Parham. Dissly, I think, has been underrated in Seattle. He's a decent blocker. He can make some plays. Hayden Hurst, 2 years removed from a really good year with Cincinnati, was terrible for Carolina last year. Parham's always kind of been that big, giant red zone threat for them. I think it's fine. It's kind of nothing special, and it doesn't elevate the receiving targets on this team too much, but I do still think that it makes sense. It's decently constructed, and you've got a couple of interesting pieces there. Then we have the Broncos for me at number 4. Adam Troutman is a fine wide tight end. I don't think he's anything more than that, but he is a low-end wide tight end starter. Lucas Kroll, Greg Dulcich is kind of the intriguing one. He's most likely going to be that big slot player. I don't think he's really particularly good when it comes to inline blocking and being on that line of scrimmage. He was an interesting third-round pick, though, just a few years ago out of UCLA, so I could definitely see him being an interesting piece that elevates this group a little bit, but I don't think there's anything too exciting in this Broncos room. The offensive line was honestly very tough. I think all 4 of these teams actually do have a pretty decent offensive line. I'm going to put the Chiefs at number 1 because I think they have the best interior in the entire NFL. Their 3 interior players, Joe Thuney, Creed Humphrey, and Trey Smith, those are all 3 all-pro caliber players. So I really, really like what they have on the interior. Those guys are as reliable as they come on the inside. I also really liked the Hunter Nourzad pick out of Penn State in the 5th round as well. The tackles are much more of a question mark. Jawan Taylor had a lot of penalties. He was super inconsistent last year, but I think he's okay on that right side. You have Lucas Niang, Ethan Driscoll as depth. And then you have Wanya Morris, who was a 3rd-round pick out of Oklahoma. Didn't have a ton of action, stepping in at left tackle. It's also a big question mark. You also drafted Kingsley Suamataia, who I was high on. I really liked that pick at the end of the 2nd round. You probably don't want him starting this year because his technique was a mess. But as a long-term prospect, I do really like him. So I think the tackles are a little bit of a question mark. I think you'll be okay at those spots. And then the interior is amazing. The best, probably, interior in the entire NFL. So that is going to put the Chiefs at number 1 there. I'm going to go with the Chargers at number 2, and I love what they have at tackle, kind of the complete opposite of the Chiefs. You have Rashawn Slater, who is just a rock at that left tackle spot. He's been a very consistently good player at tackle. And then you have Joe Alt at right tackle. I think he was the best tackle in this draft. He was a top 5 player for me, so I think he was fantastic selection. Moving over to the right side, I don't foresee that being a major issue for him. The interior is a bit more of a question mark. Zion Johnson, I really liked coming out of Boston College. He's been a little bit up and down at that left guard spot, but I still believe in the talent there. Jamarius Allier was great stepping in for Slater 2 years ago at left tackle. Played guard last year as a 6th-round pick out of Georgia. He was okay. He definitely wasn't quite as good as I think they had hoped, but he's decent. And then you bring over Bradley Bozeman to replace Corey Linsley at center. I think the interior is just fine. I don't think you have any major weak links. I don't think any of them are unplayable, but I wouldn't say that any of them are necessarily super strong players on the inside, but I love their tackles. So I think this is still a pretty good group. And then I am going to go with the Raiders up next. I really, truly think all 4 of these teams have great offensive lines. Colton Miller, really good player at left tackle. He's just a rock at that left tackle spot. Andre James had a true breakout year. He was fantastic for them at center. And then I think that they've got some interesting young pieces as well. Dylan Parham, Jackson Powers-Johnson, both at the guard spots. Jackson Powers-Johnson was my number 1 interior lineman in this draft. Got him in the 2nd round. I think he's a really good prospect. He's got good leverage. I really do like him. And then Dylan Parham, I thought, was an underrated player in the 3rd round coming out of Memphis at that right guard spot. I think he showed some flashes for sure. You have Thayer Munford, who I really do think played pretty well at the second half of last year, and DJ Glaze as depth. I really do like this lineup. You also have Andrews Pete, Cody Whitehair, both guys that played a lot of games as depth. So I really do like this Raiders group. I think there are still some question marks about the guard spots and maybe right tackle with Mumford, who hasn't shown a ton of consistency in that spot, but the flashes have been really good. I really do like this Raiders offensive line as well. And then we have the Broncos at number 4, but I don't want to discredit the Broncos at all. Their offensive line is very solid as well. Garrett Bowles at left tackle, when he's been able to stay healthy, has been really good. Ben Powers has started a lot of games at left guard. I think he's just fine. Quinn Meinertz, I do think, has developed into a really good player. I hoped he could take the step as that kind of all-pro caliber player that a lot of people thought he could take as well. I don't think he necessarily did that, but he's a nasty run blocker. He'll definitely get after you. And Mike McGlinchey, though expensive, I thought still proved to be a pretty good player on that right side. The biggest question is center. You have Luke Wattenberg, Alex Forsythe, Sam Mustipher. None of those guys are proven commodities by any means. I think that's probably the biggest question mark of any offensive line that we've gone through so far. Losing Lloyd Cushenberry to the Titans, I do think, was a loss, but I think they'll be able to figure it out. Center is probably the most easily replaceable just because you can shadow them with a lot of double teams. But overall, this is a top 20 offensive line in the NFL as well, I'd say. So it's just a very good division when it comes to the offensive line groups. Moving to the edge group next, I am going to go with the Chargers. I think it's very close between them and the next team, but the Chargers still do have their 2 big-name players, Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa. I actually did really like Tuli Tuipulotu as well and how he performed. Bud Dupree has been an interesting player. Chris Rumpf, I think, has shown flashes at times here and there. But Khalil Mack, I think, definitely still showed that he is a great player. He had 18 sacks according to PFF last year. Now, 6 of them came against the Raiders last year, so definitely it came in bursts, but I thought he was still a super productive player. Joey Bosa is definitely, injury riddled at this point, but he is a really good player when he's able to play. Tui Pelotu, I do really like. I thought he showed some great things out of USC last year, a second-round pick, so I am going to put them at number 1 here, but fully acknowledging that I think far and away the best edge rusher in this division is Max Crosby. I think he's still criminally underrated. Even people that think he's a top 10 edge rusher in the NFL, I think that is not even close to giving him enough credit. He is a top 5 edge rusher in the NFL, and there's a lot of great edge rushers. You think of guys like Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Micah Parsons. I definitely think Max Crosby is right up there with them. He is so good in just creating pressure, being a run defender, creating just great intensity. He's awesome. The other right edge spot, you've got Malcolm Kuntz, who showed some decent things. Tyree Wilson was a bit of a disappointment as a first-round pick in 2023. But, I do think that there's some good players to pair with Max Crosby, and Crosby is so dominant. But ultimately, I'm just going to put them right below the Chargers because I think the Chargers have a little bit more proven commodity at number 2. Then, this is really tough as well. I am going to put the Chiefs next. George Karlaftis definitely broke out last year. He was really good for this team. You also have Mike Dana, who was underrated, Charles Omenihu, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, who was their first-round pick out of Kansas State. I think they bring the depth, and, Karlaftis really did turn into a really nice low-end number 1 edge rusher. Their first-round pick in 2022 out of Purdue. He definitely showed up and was very productive for them. But once again, I really like this Broncos edge group. I think it's very high upside at the very least. You've got, some guys, Zach Allen, I think is more of an interior player, but, you've got Baron Browning, Jonathan Cooper, Jonah Ellis, Nick Bonito, Ronnie Perkins. Baron Browning, I think, has true edge 1 potential. He hasn't shown it, which is why, they probably end up being last here, transitioning over from true off-ball linebacker into that edge rush role. He was a little bit up and down, dealt with some injuries, but I think he absolutely has some potential to be a really good player. Jonathan Cooper, I think, has shown to be a really nice number 3 edge rusher. He can do kind of everything, set the edge, get after the quarterback a little bit. Nick Bonito has some of the best true bends, just screaming off the edge, kind of like a Chop Robinson type. He is really interesting. And then Jonah Ellis dealt with some injuries at Utah, is undersized but had a lot of crafty moves. I think he is a very interesting player as well. So I actually do like this Broncos edge group, but I think it's more based on potential and what they could be than what they are right now. So that is going to put them at number 4 at this point in time. Then we are, of course, going to put the Chiefs at number 1 when it comes to the interior defensive line. Chris Jones, probably the best interior defensive lineman in the NFL right now. I'd say it's him or Dexter Lawrence now that Aaron Donald has retired. He's so good. Just penetrating, his long, athletic build just makes him so difficult for interior players to guard. You have Derek Nandi, who is a perfectly fine nose tackle. Mike Pennell. Most of these guys are just kind of whatever, but Chris Jones is one of the 3 best interior players in the entire league right now. Once he came back from kind of his contract dispute with the Chiefs last year, this defense got much more ferocious, getting after the quarterback, especially on third downs. He is a very good player. So I am going to put the Chiefs at number 1. And then a team that has had a lot of issues on the interior, but I think recently have upgraded, is going to be the Raiders. I actually kind of think they're a little underrated this year in this division. I like Christian Wilkins as a signing. That was a lot of money that they spent on him, but I think he's a really good player. He's something that they've really needed as that kind of true 3-tech. He's really good in the run defense as well. I think, as long as you're not asking him to take on true double teams consistently, I think he can be a penetrator, but he is a great pass rusher. You also have John Jenkins, who's fine, coming over from Miami as well. Byron Young, I thought, was decent in limited snaps as a 3rd-round pick out of Alabama. I don't think it's an amazing group, but Wilkins is one of the better interior defensive players in the league. I'd say he's top 15. John Jenkins, Byron Young, Adam Butler. I think that's a perfectly fine group as well. Then we're going to go with the Broncos next. I do like what the Broncos did on the interior, bringing in John Franklin Myers from the Jets. I think that was an amazing trade for him. DJ Jones, Angelo Baxson, Malcolm Roach. Do I think it's the best interior in the league? No, far from it. But you've got solid guys. Zach Allen, of course, as well. We briefly mentioned him in the edge group. Was more of a defensive end early in his career. Now has turned into a full-time kind of interior player. And, he was really good. I think, he was expensive bringing him over from Arizona. But those three guys, and then Roach, Blackson, those are perfectly fine depth pieces. I don't think you've got a star player, but you've got a really nice rotation of three really solid, good players on the interior there. And then we're going to have the Chargers at number 4. They also have dealt with lots of issues on the interior of the defense, and I think it's okay. You have Poona Ford. He's all right. You have Odo Ogbonnia. He's all right. A 5th-round pick in 2022. Justin Abwigi, who you bring in from Alabama this year. You're definitely hoping he can turn into something, but it's very much still questionable. You have Morgan Fox bringing over from Carolina. Most of these guys are smaller, kind of penetrating type players. Poona Ford, you think of in particular. He's a decent player. He's big, but I don't think he's amazing at holding up against double teams. The Chargers have really struggled with run defense back when they were under Brandon Staley. I expect Harbaugh to bring a much harder-nosed kind of defensive effort to that side of the ball, but I still think it is going to be problematic with the interior of this defensive line. When it comes to linebacker, going to put the Chiefs at number 1 as well. This is a very well-balanced, well-built roster. Nick Bolton is a really good linebacker. He kind of flies around the field, makes plays. Drew Tranquill, I also think, is just a solid number 2 linebacker. He's got some decent instincts. He's an all-right athlete. He can fly around, be your weak side linebacker, and make plays. Kind of not always asked to consistently kind of stack and shed, but I think that he can kind of fly around, be that weak side kind of sealant, and do a pretty good job at that. Then Leo Chanel, kind of a hybrid edge, true off-ball linebacker type of player, but thought he showed some really nice flashes as well. I thought he was very underdrafted as a 3rd-round pick in 2022, and he's turned into a really nice role player for them as well. So those are 3 solid linebackers for this Chiefs team. I don't think any of these teams necessarily have terrible linebackers. Next up is going to be the Raiders. That Robert Spillane was actually really good for this team last year. And I think they brought him on blitzes. He would fly around. He's not the best coverage player, but when it comes to run defense, I really like him in that role. He had an 89.0 PFF run defense grade, had an 87.7 pass rushing grade, so on blitzes he's dangerous as well. I think he's a really solid player for them. And then, he's not the best coverage player, but Divine Diablo is a really interesting athlete. Let him fly around and kind of make plays. I think that's a nice 1-2 complement there. And Tommy Eichenberg, I thought, was a steal for them in the 5th round. I think he's perfectly fine as kind of that strong side linebacker. He was really good instinctual player in the middle of that Ohio State defense. I do think that was a steal getting him in the 5th round, so I really do like that pick for him as well. Then we're going to go with the Broncos next, and this is unfortunate. I think Alex Singleton's a really good run defender in particular. He's fantastic in that role. But the big loss is Drew Sanders. He was, supposed to be your other linebacker this year, got unfortunately injured in camp, so you can't really count him too much in this linebacker ranking. Cody Barton was a bit of a liability for Washington last year. I just don't think that he's as good of an athlete, has as good of instincts as you would want for a guy that's probably going to be out there quite a bit in your nickel defense. So Singleton's a great player, but I'm just not sure he's fully going to be able to kind of cover all of the deficiencies of the other linebackers in this unit. And then we are going to put the Chargers at number 4. Don't at all mind moving on from, some of the players that they had before, Kenneth Murray, players like that. I think Junior Colson was a really nice 3rd-round pick. He was always going to be a Jim Harbaugh guy for sure. Denzel Perryman, been in the league a long time. He's a good run defender. He's not the most athletic in coverage and has some deficiencies there, but I think Dion Henley, an interesting 3rd-round pick out of Washington State, good athlete. Last year, you can maybe use him in that role, so I'll be interested to kind of see how they line up with this unit, but I think Colson will be pretty good. He's a good instinctual player kind of from day one, even if he's not the highest upside player. Just realized that I forgot to add coaching here, so just added that there, but we're going to be moving to the cornerbacks next. And this is going to be the Broncos. And they have the 2nd best cornerback in the entire NFL in Pat Surtain. He is amazing. I think that, it is tough because Sauce Gardner is that good. I think he's the clear-cut number 1 corner, but I think it's clear-cut number 2 corner in the league, Pat Surtain. He will match up against any wide receiver in the NFL, and he'll win more matchups than he loses for sure. And then Levi Wallace, bringing him in from Pittsburgh. He's an okay number 2. He's going to get beat from time to time for sure, but he's a decent player. You also have Riley Moss. Jaquan McMillan is really the interesting one, was an undrafted free agent in 2022. He was kind of up and down last year, but I thought he showed some interesting things in the slot. I also did like the Chris Abrams drain pick as in the 5th round. I had a 3rd round grade on him, so I thought that was pretty good value for sure getting him. I think he could be a nice backup nickel for this upcoming year. Really like their corner room. Certainly starts at the top, though, with Pat Surtain. Then we are going to go with the Chargers up next. I think that this is a good group. Asante Samuel, he's probably more of a corner 2, and he is probably your best corner, but I think that that's decent. Kristen Fulton, also a guy that I would say is a solid corner 2. Coming over from Tennessee, I think that was one of the more underrated signings this offseason. I do like both of those guys. You've got Jasir Taylor as your starting nickel right now. Tarheeb still a 5th round pick. Maybe he fills into that role. But I like Cam Hart. He's a nice, long, physical corner out of Notre Dame. Drafted him in the 5th round. I don't love the depth of this corner room, but I think your starting guys, Samuel, Fulton, Taylor, it's not the most flashy group, but I think it's a rock-solid group, and you can certainly get by and do a lot worse than those guys. Then we are going to put the Chiefs at number 3. Now, don't get me wrong, Trent McDuffie is awesome. I think he's a lockdown number 1 corner already. But the other guys in this group, definitely big-time question marks after losing L'Jarius Sneed. Sneed was awesome for this team, and you're relying on guys like Najee Johnson, Jalen Watson, Joshua Williams, Kamal Haddon, who was a 6th round pick out of Tennessee. Those guys are definitely question marks. Johnson, a 7th round pick, Jalen Watson, a 7th round pick, Hayden, a 6th. Definitely big-time question marks at that other corner spot. I fully believe McDuffie can hold up against wide receiver 1s pretty well, but that other corner 2 spot I do think is going to be problematic. And then the nickel spot as well. Right now, Chamari Connor, Nick Jones, Christian Ronald Wallace are your guys in that room. Those are big-time question marks as well. I definitely think that you do not have a lot of stability in the Chiefs' secondary room here, besides McDuffie. And especially if McDuffie goes down with an injury, something like that, I don't think you have a lot of depth in this room. Losing L'Jarius Sneed, I do think, is a big time loss for this team. But I understand that you can't pay everyone. So, tough loss, but I understand why they've let him go, in that trade. And then at the number 4 spot for corner, going to go with the Raiders. I think Nate Hobbs is solid in that nickel spot. Jacorian Bennett was a very up and down 4th round pick out of Maryland. Jack Jones is a solid player. Brandon Faison. DeCamerion Richardson was a really super athletic player. 4th round pick. I love the trait swing, but yeah, this is definitely a thin corner room. Hobbs is really the only guy I feel great about in that spot. So I think that you got to put the Raiders at number 4 in this spot. Moving to the safety position, I think this is very clearly the Chargers. And it's not just because Derwin James. Derwin James did actually kind of have a little bit of a down year last year, but he's a super versatile player. You can play him in the box. You can move him all around, line him up against tight ends, slot receivers, play him as a deep safety. Alohi Gilman, he is not as good kind of down in the box. He was even better than Derwin James last year when it came to true coverage skills. And I think he kind of came out of nowhere and was really good for this team. JT Woods, AJ Finley, Akeem Dent, you've got depth here, but really those 2 guys, they're one of the best safety duos in the entire NFL, and I think that Alohi Gilman is probably one of the most underrated players in the entire league as well. So Chargers are definitely going to be number 1 in this group. The Chiefs are going to be up next. I think you've just got 2 solid safeties. You have Brian Cook. I think he's shown some decent things, being a 2nd round pick in 2022. Justin Reed coming over from Houston. I think he's an interesting player. And then I really liked the Jaden Hicks pick in the 4th round. I thought he was a very interesting kind of athletic specimen at safety. So I don't think it's anything super special. Reed and Cook are a solid 1-2, and Hicks, I think, provides some upside in that spot. But it's nothing super special. The Raiders are going to come off the board next. Marcus Epps and Trayvon Merrick, both solid players. I don't think Merrick has ever turned into the players that the Raiders hoped when they drafted him early 2nd round back in 2021. Marcus Epps is a very solid free safety. He's not, going going to give you anything super crazy, but you can definitely rely on him to be a decent safety blanket over the top of that defense, make a couple of plays on the ball. The depth behind that is really nothing of any note there. Then we have the Broncos up at number 4. I definitely think there's some interesting guys in this room, but you move on from Justin Simmons and pretty much all of the guys in that room, so it's a completely new look. You've got PJ Locke, Brandon Jones, I didn't think was ever amazing in Miami. Caden Stearns, JL Skinner's the really interesting one. A lot of people thought he would have gone way higher back last year, went in the 6th round. He's a hard-hitting kind of box safety type, so there's definitely some interesting pieces, and they could definitely surpass this ranking. Just a lot of these guys haven't played a lot. So in the case of Brandon Jones, I don't think he's been amazing. So, there's just uncertainty in that room. So I'm going to put them at number 4. Then the coaching, I think clearly it has to be the Chiefs at number 1. Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo. Andy Reid, one of the best head coaches probably in NFL history with his recent playoff success. Had success in Philadelphia before this as well, the longevity of the career. You have to put him at number 1. Next up, I think is very kind of questionable between the Chargers or the Broncos. Both coaches have had lots of success in the NFL in the past, but are in very new situations. Gonna put Harbaugh next. I think that he is proven more recently, and that's what's ultimately going to put him at number 2, winning the NCAA championship with Michigan last year, overcoming a lot of adversity with scandals and things like that. Some of that very much self-inflicted, but I think he has shown that he can develop a good culture and develop a good staff around him. You look at guys like Mike McDonald and other guys that are getting opportunities in the NFL with him as well, Jesse Minter, things like that. This is a very good coaching staff. It's good culture. I definitely think that you have to put the Chargers at number 2 just based on how recently they have had a lot of success. But Sean Payton, of course, Super Bowl champion as well. You can't discredit too much of what he's done, but it's been a while since he's really had a lot of success. Joe Lombardi has followed Sean Payton pretty much everywhere that he's gone. Vance Joseph obviously was the head coach of the Broncos at one point. I think his defense is kind of take it or leave it, but I think he's fine in that role for now. Payton obviously has rubbed some people the wrong way with kind of how he handled Russ and his comments, but I think overall he still deserves benefit of the doubt based on how he was considered a top 5 head coach for 15 years probably, and he was really consistently quite good. Then the Raiders, I do like Antonio Pierce. I think players relate to him really well. I'm glad that he got the opportunity to stay as the head coach of this team. I will say Luke Getsy is the offensive coordinator. I did not like what he did with the Bears. I did not think he did a very good job with Justin Fields, but Fields hasn't proven to be a great quarterback either, but I think the play calls were pretty stale. Patrick Graham, I do like as a defensive coordinator, so I think it's an interesting staff, but they have a lot to prove, especially Getsy and Antonio Pierce as the full-time head coach for the first time. Definitely needs to prove that he can kind of stand into that role and develop a good culture. So that's going to do it for my AFC West positional rankings here. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Who did I have too high? Who did I have too low? Let me know your thoughts, and thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy NFL content like this, we're going to be doing a ton of 2025 NFL draft stuff for the upcoming season, tier list, player rankings, team rankings, all of that good stuff. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button as well. You won't want to miss it. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one.